right, welcome back to the Will Reads YouTube. We're going to continue our series on the geography of the Wheel of Time. So yes, that's right. We're going through place by place. We've already done the two rivers. We did Barillon. And if you haven't noticed yet, there's a trend there. We start in the two rivers in Eye of the World. And then the next big location we go to is Barillon. So where's the next one? I thought about doing Whitebridge, but decided to take a little fun, quick one as a detour, which is Arihol, or more commonly known, Shadar Logoth. Yeah, shadows waiting in the Old Ton are the place where the shadow waits. So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into, at least the history behind it and the geography a little bit, where it's located and what's happened in the story, and maybe a little bit of tidbit of knowledge about what actually happened there. So let's start with where it's located. So we left Barillon. It is east of Barillon, west of Whitebridge, actually a little bit north of the Camelin Road that runs between the two. And it sits on the Arihol River. It is an abandoned city, once a very, very large city, and no living thing lives there anymore. And I'll get to that later in this video. If you've already read the books, you probably already know why. But we'll talk a little bit about the history, because you might have missed some of those nuggets or not had all the details there as far as what happened. So, when was Arihol formed? It was somewhere around 220 or so after breaking, so about 200 years after the breaking of the world. Arihol was formed with the Pact of the Ten Nations, including Manetheren and a couple other ones, 10 to be exact, were formed, and they really were during a time of turmoil. Obviously, the world had changed dramatically. People were scattered. A lot of nations still swore fealty to the Dark One. This is right after the War of Power, because the Dark One came out, and the breaking took place all during, it's kind of a prolonged event. But I think where they mark year one of the breaking is when the Dark One's prison was sealed and all the men went mad, or at least started to. So 200 years after the Dark One was sealed, there's still a lot of Dark One's forces out there. Some of the nations had still pled fealty to the Dark One, and these 10 nations joined together to kind of rein everybody in. Arihol was being one of the major 10. So for almost 1,000 years, actually 800 or so, it was a relatively peaceful existence with the minor raids from Trollocs down from the north, from the Blight, here and there, until 1,000 years after the breaking, which came the Trolloc Wars. During that, massive amounts of Trollocs and Murdral poured down from the north towards the southern nations. This is where you have the battle in Manetheren, Weep for Manetheren speech that Moraine gives in Book 1. And when Arihol abandoned, Manetheren never came to their aid. So what exactly happened there? Well, during that time, they had a king named King Balwin. He was also known as Balwin the Iron Hand, or something along those lines. And really, he wanted to defeat the Trollocs at all cost. So he actually met this guy that came in as advisor, kind of this sketchy dude, maybe a Rasputin type character if you go back to the Bolsheviks and the czars of Russia. And you have Rasputin as this weird character that comes in with all these crazy ideas. Well, that's kind of like what Mordeth was. He was an advisor that came from nowhere and had some ideas about how to fight the shadow. And one of his ideas was to fight evil with evil. As we know, the Dark One had tainted the male half of the source, and Mordeth's idea was to create a similar taint that would counterbalance the dark taint and cancel it out. So they started experimenting and creating these weird things, and what they accidentally created was another evil called Shadar. That's what they ended up calling it. And it kind of worked similar to that corruption, except it didn't have any qualms or any set purpose. Whereas the Dark One has a definitely purpose of fighting the light. This didn't care if you were on the dark side, light side, whatever side. It just wants to consume you all. Just pure evilness. But was, in an interview with Robert Jordan, was considered an opposite of the taint that was over Sidene. A polar opposite, are diametrically opposite, is I think what the exact quote that RJ gave in an interview. So after that, the city fell from the inside. Next thing you know, people came and no one was there anymore because they had all been consumed by Shadar and there was no living soul there. and they walled the city, and pretty much everyone said, don't go near there anymore. So that was kind of the end of Arihol. Got his name, Shadar Logoth. Fast forward a couple thousand years later, 2,000 years later, because it's 1,000 years, then 2,000 was Ark and Hawkwing, then 3,000 years after the breaking, which would be when the book takes place. Rand and company, the Emmonsfield Five and Moraine and Lan all end up stumbling into Shadar Logoth, being chased by Trollocs. They go there for safety, knowing that the Trollocs won't go into Shadar Logoth because, like I said, Shadar kills everything indiscriminately. So that's their reasoning behind taking shelter there. Ends up not being good for the party, splits the party up, so forth and so on. One thing about it as well is pretty much because everyone died from the inside and they kind of walled it up, there's no way of Shadar getting out. Mordeth's soul or essence or something still survived 3,000 years or 2,000 years later. So basically this entity, Mordeth, is trying to corrupt someone else in order to get Shadar out of the city and continue. It might be the personification of this dark energy, and trying to get it out. It said if you take an object from Mordeth, or if Mordeth touches you, he can infect you, and then it will spread like the plague. Of course, we see this with Matt throughout Book 1 and Book 2, and parts of Book 3 until he is healed with the dagger. But who really gets to suffer from it is Padan Fain, who full-heartedly embraces Mordeth and becomes somewhat of Mordeth, whether it's Ordeith, the kind of the blending between the Dark One's corruption and his corruption within Padan Fain. Makes it this really interesting, dynamic character. One of the reasons also why Fain is able to move through the ways so easily is because of his connection to Mordeth. As I mentioned before, those powers are opposites, meaning that they either repel or attract. Robert Jordan said two different things in two different interviews about that. That sometimes it would act as a siphon and siphon the Dark One's taint. Sometimes it would repel that as well, being that he was in the ways, and the ways is Machin Chin, which is different than Shadar. Similar, but different. RJ even said that one time. That was created from actually a carryover of the men who created the ways were tainted. So it was a extension of that taint within the ways. Corruption, if you want to use the TV show version of what they call it. So with that being said, because Padan Fain at this point is corrupted with Shadar, Machin Chin does not want to mess or intermingle at all with that, because as we learn later, if they intermingle, they destroy each other. Meaning that Machin Chin Padan Fain's pretty much untouchable within the ways. Machin Chin will not touch him because it just destroys both him and it. And Machin Chin realizes this. It's, although it's kind of an unthinking entity, obviously it talks. Machin Chin, that is. So it does have some kind of autonomy. We can get into that in a whole nother lore deep dive video into that. But that is an extension of Shadar Logoth into Padan Fain and why he's able to go through the ways, according to Robert Jordan and some of his works. Of course, how was Shadar Logoth destroyed? It was destroyed after the Winter's Heart. Sorry, spoilers if you have not made it that far. And was destroyed at the end of Winter's Heart when Rand decided to use the Choden Call with Nynaeve in order to basically siphon all of the Dark One's taint into Shadar Logoth, mixing the two together and functionally canceling each other out and destroying everything, leaving a giant hole where the city once was. So nothing really exists there anymore. Just kind of destroyed each other, basically like a nuclear explosion or something like that. Just two things that don't mix. If you mix an acid and a base, you get an explosive reaction. Some kind of opposites of chemicals mixing together, creating this, just canceling each other out. And actually, funny thing, if you mix a exact opposite acid and base, you get a neutral solution. Chemistry for you guys. So similar to that, it cancels each other out and you get nothing. So hence why Rand was able to cleanse the Dark One's taint off of the male half of the source. A lot of times said, well, how is that even possible? RJ actually did answer this in an interview one time, saying that it acts as a siphon. And if you remember when he explained the taint, it's not actually mixed in with Sidene. It's like a layer of oil, of rancid oil on top of pure Sidene at the bottom. So once you start siphoning off that top, it never mixed with Sidene. It just, you have to go through this oil to get and touch the source. So you're able just to skim it off the top or siphon it off the top, is how Robert Jordan explained it, using Shadar Logoth itself. So completely destroyed. So now we have a big hole. So that kind of ends like my little geography/history lesson of Shadar Logoth. There's not much geography to talk about there. It doesn't take place much in the story, even using things like the big white book, which is not so white, but the newer version. It doesn't, there's one page devoted to Shadar Logoth, so it's not a lot of information there that either was published there or even in the companion. So not a lot of information as far as geography. We know it was a kingdom at one point, Arihol. It fell to corruption. Now it's a giant hole in the ground. But at the beginning of the books, it is still a location. Still needs some geography there. Like I said, it sits on the river, and that's about it. So gonna do more. Obviously, next one, we're continuing on, which we go down the Arihol to Whitebridge. So I will do a dive onto the geography of Whitebridge, its history, where it came from, how it's governed, if I can figure that out. It doesn't talk about that much in the books, but we'll try to figure it out. So I'll bring that video to you next. So don't forget to hit like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about these geography deep dives. I like geography a lot, and I like going through the different locations and talking about the history and all about locations within the Wheel of Time. So until next time, guys, peace.